and her argument is, yeah, sure, for many people, work is just a job, and for some, it's a nice career where, gives you security and status and so forth. But you can also find a sense of calling if you're a janitor. And so she's got examples of, hospital janitors for whom, again, the narrative that they were telling themselves was, I can walk into this room and engage with a patient and contribute to the healing process by having a conversation with them that they can find, meaningful, or that can brighten their day, right? So if you're able to see yourself as part of a bigger story, even if your job is just, emptying baskets or sweeping the floor, if there's a way to embed you in the larger why of the organization, then that certainly allows you to recognize beauty. And
welcome back to Prosper. I'm your host, Andreas Widmer, with my colleague, Rebecca Teddy. We're coming to you from the Ciocca Center, the Entrepreneurship Center at Catholic University of America's Bush School of Business. The Ciocca Center is where innovation meets personal vocation.
Our guest today is a colleague of ours here at Catholic U, Dr. Brandon Vaidyanathan. He's a sociology professor who studies organizational culture, and he's the author of Mercenaries and Missionaries, Capitalism and Catholicism in the Global South, and also co-author of Secularity and Science, What Scientists Around the World Really Think About Religion.
He's also the founder of Beauty at Work, a media platform including a podcast that explores beauty and why it matters to our work. And last but not least, he's a very dear friend of both Rebecca and mine. We go to the same parish, and we're friends in our free time. Welcome to the Prosper podcast, Brandon.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It took a while, and we were planning to have you, but I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, it's an honor.
Yeah, we had to work around your busy globe-trotting schedule. So, Brandon, quick warm-up. So we've gotten in the habit, at least in season 3, of starting with 2 warm-up questions. One, how early or how late, what time do you get up in the morning and why? And then also, what is the best thing that you are reading right now?
So I usually get up at 6 in the morning, and it's usually because some child comes into my bed. That's mainly the reason. And then I'm often supposed to keep that child from going downstairs until 7 in the morning. So that's the that's the task. So yeah, that's most days of the week, and it's pretty consistent. Even when I travel, I usually get up at 6, unless I have to get up earlier for a flight or something. But best thing I'm reading a couple of books at the moment. One is, you mentioned innovation. There's a book that I'm reading called How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley. Matt is an extraordinary thinker and writer who's written probably a dozen books on a wide range of topics, mostly in the sciences. And I think he was The Economist for a number of years, if I remember correctly. So I have a project that's active, trying to understand how innovation happens in the realm of religion, and I'm trying to figure out how to apply some of his insights into the study of innovation in the domain of religion, if they can be applied. And I'm not so sure his approach can. So, but he's a really good writer, and there's a lot of great case studies. And then I'm also reading David Bentley Hart's book, All Things Are Full of Gods, which is a fantastic dialogue between different gods, as it were, trying to make an argument for why the materialist theory of consciousness is not viable. So anyway, two books at the moment.
Very timely, because that, of course, plays into AI and all that. And it's one of the central themes here, or central questions in the room. But before we get into that or other topics, Brandon, I think you're one of the most interesting people I know, most diversified there's not a place you haven't lived, let's face it. and
Well,
has such an interesting background, very, very wavy path to where you are today, being a colleague of ours at CUA. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your in German we would say Werdegang, like how you're becoming?
So I was born in the Arabian Gulf and spent most of my childhood there. So I was born in Qatar. My parents are from India, and they were working in the Gulf for my entire childhood. And so my mom worked as a physician, my dad as an engineer. Most of my childhood actually was in Oman, which is not a very well-known country in that region, and it's very unique for that part of the world, actually. But it's a quiet place where not too much happens, and that's a good thing, maybe. And although I didn't think so when I was growing up because it felt very boring. But I spent about 12 years in Oman, and then 4 years in Dubai, where I went to high school and started my first year of college. I moved to Canada right after I converted to Catholicism, which was also in Dubai, and then I was in Nova Scotia for undergrad. Did a master's degree in Montreal. I met my wife there. We moved to the States because she was American. I was at Notre Dame for 6 years, in Houston for 4 years, and then I've been in DC since 2017.
Have you started with sociology, or what are the focus areas of what you actually were interested in your studies?
Yeah, I didn't have any interest in sociology at all, really. I started out in computer science, like most Indians who come to North America. I thought I would be like a computer programmer or something, and the story they sold you back then. And I remember my first year of college, even my professor in Canada saying, would you like to call your parents and tell them you're making $100,000 a year with your programming job? And, just this sort of, this is just before the .com, burst, or the Y2K, bubble burst, right? And so there's all of this talk about how this was going to be an incredibly lucrative future. And then suddenly, it all kind of collapsed very quickly. But because I started college right around the time I converted to Catholicism, I became more interested in people and in questions of meaning and purpose, and wanted to understand why should we work, and what's the meaning of work, and can work have a meaning? And so there are two kinds of questions. One is more philosophical around whether work can have a meaning, which could be a theological question, and what is that meaning? But then also, why do people work when they don't find meaning? Which was what I found was rampant. That for all the people I knew growing up, work was a necessary means to an end. It was a necessary evil, but nothing intrinsically valuable could be found in it. And I just wasn't so sure. Um, and because I had the luxury of a liberal arts education, I wanted to interrogate that. And so I switched out of computer science into business, and my business professors were generous enough to allow me to start to explore this question. I did an honors thesis in my undergrad on spirituality and meaning in the workplace, and all of the ways in which that kind of pursuit for bringing the whole self into the workplace could be a good thing as well as something exploited. Because in many companies it just became, this is a new way to maximize productivity by introducing meditation workshops, etc. And it just became a tool for materialist end. And then even in my master's degree, I kept trying to essentially do philosophy or theology, but my parents would never pay for that. So I found myself doing another business degree because the University of Montreal was willing to give me a very generous scholarship. And then my faculty mentors there encouraged me to do this really interdisciplinary mix of philosophy and social science, and I essentially found myself doing sociology. I wanted to understand how the shift to liberalize the economy in India was affecting people who were working in global corporations, particularly in call centers. And so that became an empirical project. I needed to understand sociology in order to do that kind of work. That is, how do people concretely navigate tradition and modernity? And so that was really my introduction to sociology. And I began to realize that maybe a lot of the questions that I have are not philosophical questions, but they're empirical questions. And I need to actually know how to measure, like what's going on.
That's really fascinating. And so then how did the interest in, you can see, but parse it out for us. How did that kind of dovetail or angle into this specific interest in beauty, specifically in beauty at work?
Yeah, that's very unexpected for me. It was not even on my radar at all. Until I was well into my graduate degree in my doctorate, my PhD program in sociology, and I was oddly enough taking a course on social movements and protest movements. And in the literature on protest movements at the time, there was an argument that what we've neglected is the role of emotion, and we've neglected how these movements are products of moral outrage. That what fuels a social movement fundamentally is a negative moral shock. And I just thought there was something missing about that. Like if there's outrage at something or a negative shock, it implies that something positive has been taken away. And so it seemed like there was some kind of argument to be made for a positive element, and it was around that time that I stumbled upon a book called On Beauty and Being Just by a Harvard philosopher, Elaine Scarry. And her argument is that it is in encountering the symmetry of the natural world and the harmony of the natural world that our desire for justice is born. And it was a very unusual and provocative argument. And she talked a lot about how beauty is unselfing and pulls us out of ourselves and so forth. And so that was the beginnings of my thinking about that concept. And then a few years later, I was doing a big research project on scientists trying to understand the role of religion and again, meaning in science. And in doing hundreds of interviews with scientists in different countries, we would ask them about why they would make these sacrifices. So many of them worked very long hours and had given up sometimes their health. They'd given up lucrative careers in industry. Um, why do you do this? And I was surprised to hear a number of them say, because it's beautiful. And that's not a word I would have expected. And so I really want to understand what that meant. And so that's why for the last 6 years now, I've been trying to understand the role of beauty in science. But that became really for me a clue that, hey, there's something here that's really important. And the more I talked to scientists, the more it became clear that this is not just unique to science, that this is what they're talking about is an intrinsic aspect of work more generally.
Interesting is the connection I'm making when I'm reading. I read your book about missionaries and mercenaries, and people there were splitting a bit the work and the evangelization, and they sort of lived a double life. Then you go into beauty or work, and you're finding people who actually merge the two. I think a lot of this, in a way, has to do with culture, both outside and inside the company. And what triggers this to me is when you said it's something taken away, because a part of work culture today is the disengagement, right? We have an epidemic of disengagement at work. It's one of the things we pride ourselves here at the Bush School at CUA is that our students, even years out into the workforce, we're not that old yet, so we can't measure decades yet, but years into the workforce, our students are double as engaged in the workforce than the national average, and we like to argue that that's because we give them a deeper why, a sense of beauty, and a sense of their contribution, and maybe that is the natural place of work, what you're researching, and then if that's taken away, it's kind of the revolution, and the protest movement is the disengagement, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think disengagement has a number of sources. And yeah, I mean, part of it is being unable to recognize the intrinsic value, right? And I think recognizing beauty is one way in which, through a lot of my work recently, I've been trying to help people reconnect. And so that, seeing uh, intrinsically why something is valuable, not because it's a means to an end, not because it gives me more status and prestige, or it gives me more money, or allows me to have like a stronger, sense of worth, right? But there's something where you lose yourself, something that captivates you, something that is worth doing for its own sake, right? All of those sorts of things are aspects of what people describe as finding beauty in their work. Um, there is a kind of unhealthy engagement that we also find, oddly enough, which is what Derek Thompson at the Atlantic calls workism, where work becomes your ultimate meaning, right? And this is where people who don't have a healthy sense of disengagement can get lost, and that also paradoxically can lead to burnout, which is you invest yourself so much and so fully
Yeah, it's a
into your work.
boundary issue. Yeah,
Yeah,
the boundary goes away.
yeah, yeah. So you need a healthy engagement and healthy disengagement.
Yeah. But is there what I'm driving at, Brandon, is it a cultural issue or a personal issue, or and many of our listeners are entrepreneurs who are very focused on building a culture in their company or building a culture in their team, and so if it's a cultural issue, then what is there that we can actually do in what's our intentionality in creating an environment where the culture will affirm the beauty of work or beauty at work?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think there are cultural factors and their personality or personal factors at play, and I think often it's too easy to sort of say this, this is a personal thing, and then some people just don't have a certain work ethic, or don't have a certain imagination, or certain mindset, or certain virtues, right? And there's some truth to that. I think you do need a set of dispositions. But one of the things I found in my work is people with the best intentions and the best dispositions can be deformed by the cultures they're in. And that was that first book of mine, Mercenaries and Missionaries, was people who had grown up, it seems, in solid environments and went in to work with the best of intentions and found themselves becoming, in 2 or 3 years, a very different kind of person, and talked about the moral corrosion. And so there are three factors that I think really drive cultural change. One is narratives, and these are the kinds of things we tell ourselves and tell each other. Right? So, what kind of story are we telling ourselves about what we're doing? Right? What kind of story is the company telling its employees about, like, what kind of business are you in? Why are we doing what we're doing? Do you emphasize the why, or is it just about, we got to deliver these things, or we have to stick to these KPIs, or these metrics, right? And so if it's entirely transactional, um, if the entire discourse is sort of instrumentalized, then there really isn't a sense of a deeper why. Or if there's a disconnect, right? If often what happens is employees start to feel that the company just pays lip service, right? They say that, oh, we're a family, and you have all of this sort of language, but in practice, everybody knows that if you want to survive here, you got to avoid this person, and suck up to this person and kiss this person's rear end, and so that's the kind of what we call hidden curriculum, right? So that's the one of the things that really has to be dealt with, is to see whether there is a disjuncture between the kind of formal scripts that are voiced, and then the kind of de facto scripts that people are internalizing. So that's the first factor. The second factor is models. So who are models for success in your work environment? Who is being looked up to as an exemplar? And again, here sometimes people look up to those who are, I mean, in any new environment, we're always trying to figure out, like, who's actually thriving here, who's getting ahead, who seems to be successful, and we unconsciously imitate those people. And Luke Burgess has done a tremendous job in his work on mimesis and mimetic desire, to sort of explain that mechanism. But this is the kind of thing I found in the workplaces I studied. People are always imitating others, and you always imitate the person who gets ahead. And so again, you have to be really conscious about who you're putting forward as a model. And then finally, the third factor is habits, right? And so this is really where companies need to intentionally cultivate virtues, um, because I think cultures form us, and they deform us. So we have to really pay attention to what are the ways in which people are, again, learning to gossip, or learning to cut corners, or are they building habits that cultivate an attentiveness to intrinsic value, and to doing something for its own sake, or pursuing excellence. Like what are the actual habits that people develop, right? So those scripts, models, habits, those are the three mechanisms I think that you can pay attention to, and to figure out, how are we bringing beauty into the stories we tell ourselves about why we do what we're doing. Is there a beautiful sense of purpose? Do we find beauty behind the why? And then in the process, right, that we do, and then the habits that we cultivate, is there a way for people to recognize the beauty there? And then certainly in the models and the people that they follow.
I think this is a good time to pause. This is so cool. Scripts, models, and habits or virtues. I think that's something to double click on. But let's just pause here for just a second in our conversation with Brandon Vaidyanathan, to invite you, if you are enjoying this podcast, to be sure to like us, leave us a great review, and subscribe. It really does help us. And to learn more about the show and the work of the Ciocca Center for Principled Entrepreneurship, connecting innovation to personal vocation, visit us at cioccacenter.com or click the link in our show notes. We'd love to get your feedback and support.
Did you know that family businesses account for 2/3 of America's GDP and are responsible for creating 6 in 10 jobs in the United States? That's right. Family enterprises like yours are the backbone of our economy, the heart of our communities, and the keepers of legacies that span generations. We think about family business differently at Catholic University's Bush School of Business. That's why we created the Family Business Consortium. At the Family Business Consortium, we've created a community of peers who truly get it. They've sat in your chair, faced similar decisions, and found ways to thrive while keeping family at the core of their success. Find out more in the show notes to the podcast or at familybusinessconsortium.org. That's familybusinessconsortium.org. Great. So just to dive back in, if you're just joining us, we're talking to Brandon Vaidyanathan about beauty and specifically about beauty at work. And Brandon, at the break, we were just talking about your scripts, models, and I forgot what your third thing was now.
Habits.
Because I got habits, yes. Which is embarrassing for me to mess up on that because our dean of our business school has a whole book on super habits. But the word escaped me for a second. But you've touched on this already, but maybe to just make it more explicit. Sometimes people will say, well, here's something that's commonly said. Some people have careers and other people just have jobs. And is it something that doesn't inherently seem creative? Can working on an assembly line, right, or reconciling accounts, is that work that can also be beautiful? And in other words, can any work be beautiful? And you've touched on it a little bit, but why is it so important for us to be able to find beauty in this way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is possible. I don't know if it's possible for everybody, right? And so it's certainly possible for you to recognize that in this line of work, I simply don't thrive, and maybe the ways in which I can be most generative and make a better contribution would be in something else that aligns more with where I find beauty, right? But that being said, you can always find, I think. As long as let's sort of bracket out conditions that are inherently, intrinsically evil or something, right? I don't want to say we can find beauty in a kind of the process of sending people to a concentration camp or something. So let's bracket out like there's certain kinds of work that we want to say no. But yeah, I think that there's great work done by Amy Rizhnowski at Yale, who talks about this model of job, careers, and callings. And her argument is, yeah, sure, for many people, work is just a job, and for some, it's a nice career where it gives you security and status and so forth. But you can also find a sense of calling if you're a janitor. And so she's got examples of hospital janitors for whom, again, the narrative that they were telling themselves was, I can walk into this room and engage with a patient and contribute to the healing process by having a conversation with them that they can find meaningful, or that can brighten their day, right? So if you're able to see yourself as part of a bigger story, even if your job is just emptying baskets or sweeping the floor, if there's a way to embed you in the larger why of the organization, then that certainly allows you to recognize beauty. And I would argue there are 5 dimensions to beauty at work. There's like I said, the why is the most important, I think. Having a sense of purpose, I think, outweighs a lot of things. There's beauty in process. And so there may be challenges people experience because they're working in a way that they find is just not, it's not aligned with their personality or their capabilities or their strengths. But can you work in a way that you would find beautiful? And you can ask people, like, what would working in a way that you find beautiful, what kind of process do you experience as beautiful? And so it may be that somebody is so someone might be the kind of person who just needs a lot of silence, and they just, that's where they thrive. And if they're in a noisy environment that's really chaotic, that's provokes too much anxiety for them, and that's just not the best environment for them. And you might have the opposite influence, where some people might need to be in a noisy cafe or in a bustling environment, right? And that process, or a chaotic process, might
So that
actually
would
be
be like
beautiful.
that would be like the what. So the why and then the what.
Uh-huh.
The process is the what, right?
I'd say the process is the how. The what
Ah,
would be what you actually produce, right? So what are the outcomes or products of your work? And so there's excellence and craftsmanship and the intrinsic value in what you're generating, right? And so a job well done, a spreadsheet well done, like really well designed, right? Well executed, that can be a thing of beauty.
okay.
Um, and then the who, right? So who are you working with? Either the people you're working for, the people you're working with, the people that you're serving, right? And so keeping in mind the people, being able to recognize the beauty uh, at that level is really important. There's a great example of a Danish company that uh, they'd found this was kind of I think it was a retirement home, or it was a company that provided food services for elderly people, and they were making terrible food, and they were really, the workers were burning out, and they brought in this consulting firm to figure out, okay, what's going on, how do you improve it, etc. They realized, well, if we take these people to visit the elderly folks they're serving, and then like spend some time with them and take photographs with them, and then they go back and then they have those photographs on their kitchen, in their kitchen, uh, uh, what do you
Counter.
call it? Yeah,
Counter or
yeah. I mean,
something.
just sort of put them up on the wall.
Mhm.
That just transformed everything. I mean, it transformed the kind of food they were producing. It changed the way in which they were actually performing, because they now had
Mhm.
that sense of who they're serving. Right, it became much more clear and much more tangible. And the final concrete thing is place, right? I mean, there are very simple things. We were human beings, and we're affected by sunlight and green space, etc. So if you work in a dark, dingy basement, it's going to affect your health and your sense of well-being. And sometimes it can't be helped. But
Yeah.
even there are things you could do, whether it's artificial light or little plants, or they're
Exactly,
small things.
exactly. Yeah. Which
Color,
is
splashes of color, so.
yeah. I'm actually coaching, I coach people here and there just in the private sector, and the where is actually where we came up with, it's sort of an industrial kind of area and office, and we actually he came up with the idea to create a beautification process, to say it's more welcoming, more beautiful, like you're saying, more light and everything. It makes a huge difference. Makes
Yeah.
a huge
Yeah.
difference. It's also interesting, parallel to what you're saying is, Rebecca and I, when we teach 118, we bring in, uh, I don't know if you've heard of Kevin Majors up at Harvard,
Yes, of course.
and
Yeah.
he has
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
optimal work, and we actually do this. We bring it in, in our class, everybody starts a business. Every student at the Bush School starts a business, and then we bring in optimal work to say, our agenda is, I want you to learn not because I'm telling you. I want you to learn because you want to get better. I want you to create golden hours where you reframe why you're doing this. You're not doing this because Andreas or Rebecca is telling you to do this. You're doing this, and you're going to prepare your golden hour to say, how is this going to make me better? How is this going to be, it's the why, how, what, who, where, that you're framing this in a way that will touch what you love, and because it touches what you love, it increases the power of your will, like it strengthens
Absolutely.
your will.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this the direct
Yeah.
parallel, or?
It's exactly the same thing. And I think beauty is a lens through which you look at all these things, right? And so there are multiple kinds of whys you could have. So you ask people to think about the purpose for, behind, like, why are you doing what you're doing, or why does your company exist? And you could have a more moralistic purpose that sort of feels like a finger wagging. It feels like, it imposes some guilt on your shoulders. And I suppose that can push some people to work. But if you ask them, well, where's beauty in that? It opens up a new imagination, right? I think it's lighter and it's more freeing. So I think it's a component of all of those dimensions, not the only component, but I think it's one that attracts us, right? It has an intrinsically motivating energy.
I'm so fascinated by your saying that, Brandon, because we mostly teach freshmen, and there's a
Hmm.
we watch and are very pleased on the whole that students come in one way, and at the end of our class, many of them are quite touched and are thinking about the life of business
Hmm.
a little differently. And yet, I find it's very fascinating that even the students who are not religious um, are kind of natural moralists. It might be a function of
Hmm.
being 18 or 19. And, I remember being as a teenager, very black and white and in a way kind of judgmental, although they wouldn't
Hmm.
think that they're judgmental. but there's a certain kind of moralism that they can't break out of. And so they will always default back to the idea that businessmen, even though they are themselves pursuing business, that businessmen are kind of cutthroat and greedy. And we talk to them a lot about enterprise solutions to poverty and to other kinds of social problems. And they will understand that, okay, that direct charitable aid is not sufficient to create, it solves a problem in the moment, but it's not sufficient to create prosperity in the long term. And it's not usually a sustainable model. So they understand that, but they will, if you ask them why, I've just graded a bunch of exams, so this is why this is so much on my mind. They will always default to why will charity not end? Why is it not enough? And it's because people get dependent and they're lazy. So that's always they're always back to the kind of Western finger wagging, and they forget about the problem of crowding and making it impossible for people. And the same thing with when I talk to them about freedom, and we talk a little bit about freedom from constraint, and then versus thinking about what will you use your precious freedom for.
Right.
And when I ask them a question about that on the exam, they always default to the moral, like discipline is important because it prevents you from doing bad stuff. And I'm trying so hard to make them see the beauty of what they could do. Because my big thing is, most of us have very little understanding of the good that we're capable of doing in the world.
Right. Yeah.
With excellence, if we would pursue beauty. So I'm fascinated by what you're saying, and also trying to think as you're talking about how to incorporate this more into our class, because I don't think anybody needs to be more finger wagging,
Right.
and they need to understand the beauty of freedom, or the freedom of beauty, a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard. I mean, I've found that it's challenging for my students, and the concept is not sufficiently suffused in our culture, right? I mean, we reduce beauty to fashion and cosmetics, maybe to high art. Like, I mean, that's really it, right? So it's very hard to get beyond those connotations and to think of it in the terms that we're talking right now.
It's interesting. I was going to ask you, is it true that beauty is in the eye of the beholder? And let me bracket this with something. The true, the good, and the beautiful is the roundabout description of the Lord, of God the Father, in a sense,
Yeah.
And I have changed my mind over time. And what I want you to do is to just explain what I'm saying or interpret what I'm saying. And in terms of that, I don't fully understand it myself, Brandon, okay? But you're the expert here. I've learned over time that there is an absolute. It's almost like the Aristotle kind of thing: the true, the good, and the beautiful. There's an ideal, and I found if I have to define true, good, and beautiful, is that it's an acquired taste. So I was also very moralistic in my teens, in whatever I thought was right and wrong, and be black and white. And I've actually gotten, in a sense, more gray as I get older, because it's an acquired taste. And I started to realize how I'm actually not close. And so when I'm saying beauty at work, can it be that I mean something completely different than somebody else, like the people you've interviewed for your first book?
Those are great questions. I mean, I mean, there's a couple of issues. So one is, whether our experience of beauty, like the things that we find beautiful, change over time, right? So 50 years ago, there are things that you found beautiful that you don't find beautiful today, right? And I think that's obviously true, right? And so there is a sense in which our taste changes. Is that reflective of something objective about the world, right? And that's one would hope so, right? I mean, if you are the sort of what's that Michael Douglas film Wall Street, right? Like if you're if you are like Gordon Gekko or something, then your character is being deformed, and then the things you find beautiful as you progress in life are actually objectively worse than they used to be. So it's possible. There's no guarantee, right, that our taste is a reliable barometer for what is objectively beautiful, and so. So we could say, yeah, I mean, God is intrinsically true, good, and beautiful. He possesses all of those qualities, and being itself, right? The metaphysicians will tell you that everything that is is in some way true and good and beautiful by virtue of the fact that it exists. The problem is, when you look at any concrete thing, to what extent does it participate in those things? And that those sorts of, that's where you have a lot of variation. I think that a certain degree of expertise perhaps is needed. I mean, a certain degree of maturity is needed in recognizing where there is or isn't beauty. I mean, if you look at saints who have a much keener awareness than you and I do about their own sinfulness, right? I mean, so there's a way in which they're more attuned to ugliness or to failures or to imperfections than we might be. We might say, look, I mean, I'm doing pretty great, and what I'm experiencing is beautiful, etc. And then if we had more maturity, we might say, oh gosh, there's all this other stuff mixed in, right? So I don't think there's any clear guarantee. I mean, I do think there are objective realities, but our ability to participate in that has to be formed. It has to be shaped, and hopefully we are aligning ourselves again to the right narratives, the right models, the right habits that'll move us in the direction of that alignment of truth and good and beauty.
Maybe the
Beauty, yeah.
question, maybe the path leads to the answer, meaning that as long as we ask this question, we're on the right path. But Brandon, I know we're only hitting the tip of this iceberg. We could have hour-long conversations with you, which I do usually, but just not on a podcast. But thank you so much for sharing this work with us and for showing us how to make our life and our world more beautiful.
And Brandon, before we go, where can listeners find you to connect? You have your own podcast, right? Where can we find that?
I do, yeah. You could look it up wherever you get your podcast. It's called Beauty at Work. There's a YouTube channel. If you watch YouTube, it's Beauty at Work as well on YouTube. And then there's the platform where I host both the podcast and the YouTube channel is called beautyatwork.net. So you could look there or just search for my name and you'd be able to find these things.
Great. Thank you again. And we're going to let you go, Brandon, but Rebecca and I will be right back with our parting thoughts.
Oh my goodness, I loved talking to Brandon. Let me tell you a little bit what I loved and what I learned from him. So one we already touched on in the conversation itself, which is I really am fascinated by this question of how do we learn to be more motivated by beauty than by the instinct to wag fingers at people.
Yeah.
And how to kind of,
very true,
cajole our, 19-year-old students they're developmentally appropriate, but how to move them a little beyond that. Because even Christianity itself is more powered by the law of attraction to the beauty of the Lord than to finger wagging. But what I also love about, I was just listening to his, the idea of, habits and scripts and models, and then even his 5 places to find beauty. What I love about that is that it's very usable both for the worker and for the manager. So as a worker, as an employee, if I'm finding my job to be a little bit tedious, where can I find beauty? That it's partly on me, not just to be receiving and waiting for people to serve me and make my life good, but also, to remind myself who's the nursing home patient that I can, put up on my wall to remind me that I'm serving people and that the job that I'm doing has some beauty in it, right? Or I was thinking about mathematicians who will talk about an elegant proof, that processes can also be elegant, that there's lots of different ways that appeal to each of our own temperament to find beauty in what you're doing. And at the same time, if I'm a manager, there are ways that I can make things really better or really worse for people. I was thinking the whole time Brandon was talking about your, culture eats strategy for lunch, the third pillar of printable entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. So it works both ways, that both as an employee and as a manager of employees, I can be searching for beauty and making the business flourish better that way.
I'm just amazed in how lined up we are. Like what Brandon does and what we do is basically the same thing. Look, narrative, models for success, and habits and virtues. Okay, narrative, this is what we do in 118 in our class or in any one of the entrepreneurship classes here. we do narratives, the script. This is what optimal work does. This is what we do with the, the moral compass, all the stories that we work on of the why. Why are we doing this? The whole idea of us imitating God in the creative, in our creativity, participating in God's creative path. These are all scripts, and this is all the why. And then with the models for our success, I think we teach part of the reason why we're having this podcast is to hold up models. That's the theory of change, is to have models. If she can do it, I can do it. Being inspired by other people. I think we do a lot of promotion of role models. It's again something we ask every student to put 5 role models into their moral compass paper and actually engage with these role models. By the way, we do 3 immediate and 3 proximate, right? So it's really 6. 3 people you can actually talk to, 3 people who are, you can read about or so on. And then the habits and virtues. Of course, we're the school of habits and virtues with Andrew Abella's kind of book and everything. But it's just I think what that tells me is that it's at the core of all this is very deep anthropology. And
Yes.
whether you go at it from a scientific point of view or from the spiritual, religious point of view, you end up coming out at the same place. I think that's our time, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so. Beautiful.
Friends, listeners, thanks for being here. Take care. Until next time, we hope you prosper.